Okay, so let's talk about the kingdom fungi. So, what are some characteristics that make up the kingdom fungi? First off, note that these are mostly heterotrophic organisms that are able to break down organic or inorganic materials. And basically they're helping to recycle materials into the environment. They also make new soil. They usually have a cell wall made of chitin, which is a carbohydrate that's also found in plants. So they do have a cell wall. Fungus also have these thread-like bodies or long, slender filaments. These are usually woven tightly together to form their reproductive structures. They're similar to root structures in a plant, but yet these hyphae are a little bit different because they are the reproductive structures for fungus. They also spread out and allow fungus to cover many areas. So here's a picture of a fungus and some structures. So the hyphae are these filaments of the fungus. When they are formed, a tangled mass underneath, kind of like a really compact root system, they form what we know as mycelium. These mycelium are typically haploid and reproductive structures for the fungi. The hyphae also form these root-like structures called rhizoids. These are able to help with plants to give them nutrients that they need to grow. So how is a fungus able to obtain nutrients? They release enzymes into a material to break down organic or inorganic materials. Some fungi are able to actually break down things like rock and absorb nutrients from them. They absorb these nutrients from the cell wall. They do not have a root system like a typical plant, so they can't just absorb everything through the roots. That doesn't happen. These saprophores also absorb nutrients from dead organisms, so they're really important because they clean up the environment and they help to recycle nutrients that would be trapped in it. They work with bacteria and they're able to break down certain organisms faster than bacteria are able to. We also have some that are parasitic, and they'll break down material within living organisms, or they'll affect a living organism to kill them so that they can absorb their nutrients when they're dead. So, fungi are able to reproduce sexually and asexually, and some of them are able to do it both. So, remember, asexual reproduction goes through mitosis, and sexual reproduction goes through meiosis. And so basically what's happening here is the gills, which are little slots on the underside of a mushroom or fungus, are able to produce these spore-like structures. And these basids are able to form a diploid structure, which is able to then go into a haploid phase and then find another haploid cell and form what we know as a fusion of plus or minus for the hyphae. We call them plus or minus because they're neither male nor female. Then they'll form a mycelium, which then will form a fungus, aka a mushroom would be a better example of that. And so they can go through both sexual and asexual. So why do they go through sexual? When the hyphae of one fungus fuse to the hyphae of another, these are also positive hyphae and negative, they're able to form a reproductive structure to form a diploid nucleus, which will undergo meiosis, and then reproduce to form haploid spores, which are released into the environment that will come in contact with other haploid spores to form what we know as a zygote. Asexual reproduction is similar to sexual. They still have the hyphae, which produce long stalks. However, they will not fuse to another hyphae from another organism. At the top of these stalks, the haploid spores are produced through the process of mitosis. They're genetically identical to the parents. And imperfect fungi have no observed sexual stages. which means they are basically neither male nor female. They're known as positive and negative, which is different from most species. Even plants have males and females. Yeast and molds are types of fungus. So yeast are unicellular and reproduce through a process known as budding. Molds can reproduce both sexually and asexually. They grow very rapidly and they love to produce spores which go into the air through these hyphae. Now, if you look at a piece of bread mold, you can actually see the little hyphae, or these little finger-like projections everywhere that look like a mass of little hairs. Those are actually the reproductive structures of the mold. The reason that you shouldn't breathe in molds is because you're actually breathing in their spores, which are their reproductive structures, and when they get to a nice, warm, moist environment, they start to grow. And that could be in your lungs, in your nasal passages. Molds are very hard to get rid of. So let's talk about our four types of molds, or four groups. Basically, they're grouped on the type of sexual reproductive structures that they have. And so we have four phyla. The Chytrids are the oldest ones. Then we have our zygote, sac fungi, and club fungi. So the Chytrids, fungi, these are the oldest group of fungi and date back about 5 million years ago. They produce spores and gametes that have flagellum. This is unique. None of the other ones have flagellum. They're also only aquatic and provide a clue to the evolutionary step of fungus. They are also the least complex of all the phyla. They were once classified as protists, but again, through genetic testing, we were able to find out that they were actually fungi. They're unicellular and produce spores with gametes, flagellums. They typically feed on dead algae or plants. They're typically parasitic in aquatic fish, and are the reason that we do have a decline in a lot of amphibians in the world. Amphibians are highly susceptible to fungus, and when these type of fungi get in there, they break them down. Now I have a really cool video on here. If you want to open the PowerPoint yourself, you can watch that video later. And it's about the zygote fungi. These are typically your black molds. Black mold are not something you want to get into your lungs, by the way. They produce a zygote inside of a tough capsid. This capsule will actually allow for it to move through any type of condition until it comes to a condition which is favorable for it to grow. This is why it's really kind of dangerous to be around black molds, because they'll just incubate until conditions are perfect, and then all of a sudden you have this black mold growing. It could be in your lungs, not somewhere you want to get them. They reproduce both sexually and asexually. Like most fungus, they are referred to as positive or negative instead of male or female, because the sexual organs are identical. They produce the hyphae structures, and those hyphae structures for them are called zygosporangi. And so they are actually these little finger-like probes that you can see through on like a piece of bread mold. Again, you should watch the YouTube video. Here's another YouTube video about sac fungi that I would really recommend you watching, about their reproductive structures as well. So, sac fungi are characterized because they have a sac-like reproductive structure that produce spores. So the Ascos do produce these spore-like structures, and I would recommend you watch the video. Then we have our club fungi. Our club fungi is our most common fungi and the one that you guys are usually used to see. So these are like your mushrooms, your toadstools, your puffballs, your jelly fungi, your shelf fungi, your rusts, and your smuts. They're characterized by their basamids, or these club-like sexual reproductive structures that produce spores. Most of them produced offspring sexually. Asexual reproduction in this type of fungi is very rare, but does occur in rusts and smuts. Typically, the rest of them will reproduce sexually. So let's talk about some of them. So a mushroom is kind of neat. Don't go find mushrooms out in the wild and start eating them, because some mushrooms can produce vivid dreams, hallucinations, delusions, terrible nausea, vomiting. In some cases, you cause deep sleeps, while other mushrooms have no effects on us at all. We eat them. You can buy them in the store. You're going to do a lab tomorrow on them, and they're not dangerous. However, some of them can be highly toxic, and you don't want to go and just randomly start shoving your mushrooms in your mouth unless you know what they're going to do to you. We have smuts. Smuts are typically found on things like corns and other grasses. Initially, they will attack the reproductive system of plants, forming these galls, which are these darkened or spots, which then will burst open, releasing spores to affect nearby plants. This is why people who farm spray fungicides. This is not something that you want to get into your corn crops or any crop. What happens is it will actually eat on the fruit of the plant, and then it will burst, and it reproduces so quickly it can go through a whole field before you can stop it. This is what we consider a parasitic fungus. Rusts are also parasitic. They will affect flowering plants and ferns. There's about 2,000 species of rust, and they all affect different plants. No other group of fungi is as dangerous to agriculture or horticulture crops as rust, because it is highly contagious, it spreads so quickly, and it is devastating. And here you can see the yellow spots on the leaves of this plant. It spreads extremely quickly, and because it can reproduce asexually, there's not a whole lot that will stop it. We have shelf fungus. Shelf fungus reproduces with spores above the ground. They'll typically grow on trees or any type of pore that it can form into. These are known as mini pores because the spores produced by these produce in a line. You can see the dark spores actually forming down the middle. They also differ in not having a stem or a short lateral stem. None of them have roots. And these are the only mushrooms that will have pores instead of gills. Gills are little slots on the bottom of the mushroom or the underside that we can see. Jelly fungus is really kind of neat. Jelly fungus is completely edible. However, make sure you know what you're using it for before you eat it. Jelly fungus is edible. It's used in a lot of soups in Asia. However, jelly fungus doesn't look like a normal fungus. It has no stem, it has no gills, it has no visible pores. It actually looks like a hunk of jelly on a log. It does not look very appetizing either. And there is a picture of it right here. It does not look great. It's a little ooey and gooey when you touch it, and it has a large water content to it. Then we have toadstools. As anything in nature, if it's brightly colored, don't eat it. Toadstools are typically poisonous. They'll cause hallucinations to vomiting. There is no reason to eat them. There is no toadstool that is not poisonous. They're kind of like frogs. If they're brightly colored, don't touch them. Then we have puffballs. Puffballs are really cool, and if you want to do a Google search, you can actually look at a puffball exploding. They're called these puffballs because, one, the mycorrhizae fungi or partnership allows for them to have this symbiotic relationship with most living trees. There are some parasitic ones that will live off fairly small hosts, and they like to eat dead and decaying materials. But there's some really cool things about these ones, and I'm going to let you Google search and find some videos on them because they are neat, and they're called puffballs for a reason.